The blood on the concrete is still warm. And these assholes are making comedic documentaries about it.
Your movie is really funny. It's really funny. By myself, laughing out loud hysterically today.
We want to rename the George Washington Monument to the George Floyd Monument. Would you mind signing it?
We came up with this idea. Could we get her to actually pay reparations to ban our black producer?
Point to who we believe is the most racist person in the room. I'm on the top of the pile. That's me. Oh, sorry.
That's the white guilt liberal thing.
It's just genuinely stupid.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Ooh, that's a bingo.
You're stretching out of your whiteness.
You gave that guy money for reparations and you got her. She thought it was uncomfortable.
Yeah, that was kind of...
It's an insult to the people that are the victims of real racism.
Bingo. How fun.
One positive you could draw from that is that, well, at least that means that systemic racism is not a problem in this country anymore. I mean, if a black guy could rise to the top of the system and run it, then clearly the system is not racist against black people. And in fact, was overwhelmingly voted into that position by Americans, which is true. So that is evidence that America isn't systemically racist against black people.
Nothing is systemic anymore because the system brought one of you savage, beastly ass people to the top of its game and allowed him to rule twice in that world. You got it. Shut your fucking mouth, black people. Racism is a joke.
And most of the time, these stereotypes, they didn't just fall out of the sky. Like they're grounded in something.
We laugh at this shit. We make funny movies about this shit. We tell you what to think about racism. Your life is a joke. Your history is a joke. Everything is a joke.
Could we get her to actually pay reparations to ban our black producer?
They give you a month. Why? Why nobody else? There has to be a reason. The reason is because you only focus on what they tell you to focus on. If they tell you to focus on something in an entire month, what else could there be to focus on? They had a whole month given to you. What else could there be to your story other than what we fucking told you, savage beasts? We give you a month of shit to think about yourself. What more could you want, you ungrateful pieces of shit?
But for them, they have one lens for seeing the world.
We give you your history. We give you your names. We give you our world. We gave you the top dog, the leader of that world. That you were one of them. Nothing else matters. You broke the system with Obama. He is the best of what you have to offer. And we will praise the workings of this man who believes this on the highest order of representation in their world, this Joe Rogan experience. They will praise it to the highest of order. Why? Because nobody else can explain your story better than them. Nobody in your world is qualified. Remember, we told you you are savage beasts. You are unqualified to speak for yourself.
100 years ago, people could, walk by a Robert E. Lee monument and not care. It wasn't a big deal to them, black or white.
We will tell you how to think. We will tell you how to address what we have done to you. Don't you know that's what we do? That's why we have a correctional facility, an industry developed to control you savage beasts. And now, Black Lives Matter hasn't even put its pajamas on to go to sleep, and they are making comedies about this discussion.
BLM came into formation in 2013, I think. That was the Trayvon Martin thing.
This man is saying that there is no systemic anything involving racism, and ultimately, you guys are just overreacting.
But it's not racist, because racist means you hate people of other races or you think they're inferior to you.
Right.
This is very bold of them to speak so lightly of this. How Where is the humility in this discussion about how you need to see your experience? This is gaslighting at its finest.
There's only one person who can answer whether you're a racist person, and that's you. And if you don't think that you're racist, then you aren't.
Entire people have been erased by this system. They create systemic issues in the minds, the generations of millions of people, billions of people. And when it comes down to you understanding your own world, your own reality, they dismiss it, they downplay it, and they laugh at it. It's a joke to them. You are incapable of thinking for yourself. We will do this for you. We will make it easy for you. We'll turn it into a Netflix special. We'll force this down your feed tube. This is what Joe Rogan represents. The highest order of authority. The thought police of the world who write history books have spokesmen. They call them presidents. They call them world leaders. They call them celebrities. They call them athletes. All the people that they pay millions and millions of dollars, whether it's on top of the table or under the table. In some way they're getting paid. Maybe even energetically. Definitely even energetically. Through all of this energy harvesting that they're doing with all of these children and the rest of the stories that go into it. To do the utmost, as you can feel and understand what you represent with the Most High, what you do as a representation of that which stands for something that you might not even be able to define. But you have this intuitive awareness of some things that are wrong or some things that are just off, some things that just shouldn't be. And the way this discussion is approached has been felt like this by more than just me. Many people feel a certain way when people try to speak for our experience.
Racism is a thought process. And if it's not in your head, then you're not racist.
The boot that we are talking about that exists through these systemic institutions is still being worn by your family members. It's still on the foot. The boot on the throat is still on the foot, and they're telling you that there's no boot and there's no foot. It's gaslighting at its finest. These are the embodiment, the essence of narcissism. See it as an entity. There is such a lack of humility that in being part of the storyline that represents the people who inflicted all of these crimes on the rest of the world, still to this day, hours ago this video was posted on Joe Rogan's page. Still to this day, you are not qualified to speak for yourself.
It seemed like race relations in this country were improving like decade after decade. They weren't perfect, but it seemed like they were pretty good.
Much better than the 60s.
Yeah.
You do not only that, you do not have the authority to speak for yourself. We will not only speak for you, we will laugh for you about this discussion.
White.
Folks,
White.
trash, white supremacy, white woman, white boy,
White.
entitlement,
White.
centering, white silence.
Is there a black person around here?
There's a black person right here. Does he not exist?
This is that side effect of that entity that exists inside of these people who have been imbued with this essence of glory and authority. I will define your reality for you.
You go back 500 years, and there was nobody on the planet who considered slavery to be wrong fundamentally. They might have had issues with how slaves are treated in some contexts, but it took like thousands of years for it to ever even occur to a single human on Earth that slavery is actually fundamentally wrong. Which is a crazy thing. And that's actually an interesting thing you could talk about and think about, like, why is that? How could it be that it's so obvious to us, but some of the greatest minds of history, they never thought of it. But we can't talk about that because we have to talk about slavery and racism as if they're exclusively white Western phenomena.
Well, I've had friends that have a different perspective on the Obama situation.
I will reverse your entire universe. Your cosmology is wrong. Your language is wrong. You are wrong. Your existence is wrong. Be more like us. or we will erase you. We have done this before. Where are the Tasmanians? Where are what they call Native Americans? Where are the indigenous Americans? We have been erased figuratively and literally.
This is akin in some ways to what's going on with anti-Semitism online. I think there's always been a certain amount of people in this country and in the world that are like deeply anti-Semitic, and they just don't like Jews.
This is why they can speak the way they do for you. Books have been written explaining where we're coming from. They are uninterested in actually handling this situation. They are only interested in profiting off of this situation. You see it in the medical industry. You see it in the pharmaceutical industry. You see it in the military. You see it in Hollywood. You see it in the music. You see it in the education system. You see it in the workforce. You see it across the board. But there's nothing to be seen according to them. There's nothing there. You are overreacting. You do not understand this situation, because if you did, you'd be laughing with us about this documentary because it's so funny.
Now, all of a sudden, it's a bigger deal to us than it was to people whose like parents fought. You know, they had grandparents who fought in the Civil War or died in the Civil War. They were okay with it. And yet for us, the wounds of the Civil War are fresher or more raw for us than they were for people a century ago? It makes no sense.
They only want you to address, think, and even feel what they approve as being a reality. Your experience is not valid without their approval. If that's not the embodiment of a narcissist, I don't know what is.
One positive you could draw from that is that, well, at least that means that systemic racism is not a problem in this country anymore. I mean, if a black guy could rise to the top of the system and run it, then clearly the system is not racist against black people. And in fact, was overwhelmingly voted into that position by Americans, which is true. So that is evidence that America isn't systemically racist against black people.
This is how these systems are installed into our software. Our software has been corrupted and it shut down the entire system. Our computers aren't even turned on anymore. Everything's off. We're running their programs on our hardware, and their programs are parasitic in nature. They are Trojan horses that have gotten into our hardware and have shut everything down. So we are conditioned to think that we can only become something if we become something in their software, hardware world. The medical industry is a mirror of this. We go in to be treated by their doctors as they treat themselves. Our bodies, our makeups are different. They know that and use that as a weapon. Oh, we just didn't know. They're using it as a weapon and just labeling all these things as you have problems to level the playing field. They destroy your physical everything to level the playing field of their insecurities. Largely the playing field of genetic disposition. They don't want to talk about that story. They don't want to talk. This is why you can't know yourself. If the people of the world who made themselves and sold their world to the rest of the world, the people who originate in that land, if they come to know themselves, that will make these fake people unknow themselves, because their once real reality will now be seen as an illusion. Our truth will unveil their illusions. So we need to stomp out their truth in order to maintain our illusions.
How are we less able to be objective and non-emotional about the Civil War than people who had family members? I mean, ex-slaves were still living back then.
Well, I think it's because it's just like a religious ideology. Like when the Taliban started blowing up those ancient statues of Buddhas. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And as long as we continue to allow them to tell us our reality that maintain the stomping out of those truths, as long as we sit in that world, we will never be able to break out of those illusions that they have implanted into our reality. We will destroy ourselves from the inside out in order to be something that we are not in their world at the expense of who we really are. This is why all of these diseases come about.
So anti-black racism is out of the system. Fantastic. That's good. It's not accepted by mainstream society. Great. And then, so that's kind of it. I mean, what else can we do with this? And I kind of think you could sort of move on from it culturally to other issues. It's not a major issue anymore.
You're treated differently in their hospitals, fatally. You're gunned down in the streets by their so-called justice system. You're erased, written out of their education systems. You're kept from working in their workforce. Every system is designed to make you fail in some way. There's some way there. Whereas the opposite has been, in many cases, for another demographic of people. They don't want you to talk about that. You're supposed to laugh about how a certain group of their demographic of people interact with another group of their demographic of people. That's what's funny, is how they interact with this discussion.
When you consider microaggressions or cutting in line in front of you to get ice cream, there's people that are real victims of racism. And pretending that everything is racist just minimizes that, and in fact probably makes more people racist. It's going to make a bunch of dumb liberals drop to their knees or give you money for reparations. But it's going to make a bunch of other people really resentful. And it just polarizes us and drives people further and further apart.
Yeah. It's absolutely rejected by polite society.
That's how you should see it. When one side fixes the other side and sets the record straight of how wrong they are about how they are interacting in this reality, how you think about that discussion is wrong. It's so wrong, it's funny. I'm going to make a cool, hip documentary about it, and I'm going to talk about it on Joe Rogan.
Well, we had the idea for the film to talk about race. We knew we needed to get Robin DiAngelo.
Red white people chastising and making fun of blue white people about black American people is not funny. The frail, the all that soft stuff that people talk about liberals being in this race discussion and all that stuff.
When you consider microaggressions or cutting in line in front of you to get ice cream.
That's not us. That doesn't represent our community of how we approach this discussion. That's still them. That at the core is who they're making this video about. It's not about racism. It's about that group of people. And once again, that group of people is not us. They sprinkle in some people who look like us. They might talk about some things that we've referenced, that we've mentioned and spoken about in many different ways. But that's only to validate the rest of the discussion, which is this is what's important. This is what should be talked about, and this is what should be laughed at. Ultimately, the whole thing should be laughed at. It's just a big joke. So in that reality, racism's over. It's just a big joke. We're laughing about it now. Don't bother saying anything. I told you it's over. It's done. So have a nice day.
The system's going to treat everybody equally. Great. We crossed that off the list. We've already done that. Okay, well, if you go after white people and you demonize them relentlessly, and you do it practically from birth now through the school system.
As long as people keep believing in the authority of that world, and by believing in it, you are entertaining the idea that their perspectives are the perspectives, the highest perspectives that you need to be experiencing your world from. In the world that interacts with racism, this is what needs to be discussed. Am I racist? Who are they talking? Who is saying that?
The race hustlers don't want us to draw that conclusion. They're worried that we'll look at Obama as president and say, okay, well, racism isn't a big issue anymore. And that's a problem for them because there's a lot of power, money, and influence to be found in the racism narrative. So they had to kind of like double up on their efforts to convince us that America is actually racist, which is why during Obama's term, that's when we started getting all these race hoaxes and the race riots and BLM. That's when things like people started talking about microaggressions and all this kind of nonsense, because they needed to tell us that, yeah, you might think that this issue is kind of solved now, but it's not. Racism is actually worse than you ever imagined. It's lurking everywhere.
This is the definition of controlled opposition. White people talking about other white people about a so-called black discussion. And they made up all three sides of that story. They told you you're black. And they told that person that they was red. And they told them that they were blue. Meanwhile, the actual discussion doesn't happen because they set the record straight.
There's amazing people of all ethnicities and colors, and you should judge people, like Martin Luther King said, by the content of their character. We all agree with that.